Something didn't add up. Caitlin Clark wasn't supposed to be in Miami. Not yet. Team USA camp wasn't set to begin for another 2 weeks. The off-season grind was supposed to be slowing down. Players were expected to rest, reset, maybe post a few vacation photos, and disappear until training officially started. Instead, leaked footage surfaced. An Instagram story from Aaliyah Boston. Just a quick glimpse, Caitlin Clark in Miami. Relaxed. Smiling. Standing alongside teammates. And instantly, the internet exploded. Because this wasn't just a random beach sighting. This wasn't simply players hanging out. The timing was too precise. The names involved were too important. And the silence surrounding it was even louder. Why would the biggest star in women's basketball fly to Miami weeks before she needed to be there? Why were multiple Indiana Fever players gathering at the exact same time? And why was Sophie Cunningham reportedly spotted in the mix? That's when speculation turned into something much bigger. Because when franchise players move early, it's rarely accidental. The Fever are heading into one of the most delicate off-seasons in recent memory. Expansion draft pressure. Free agency uncertainty. Superteam rumors are swirling around the league. MVP politics heating up. Contracts coming due. And suddenly, the core of the team is assembling in private. No press release. No announcement. Just subtle social media breadcrumbs. Some fans say it's nothing. Others call it leadership. But a growing number believe something strategic is happening behind the scenes. Because when Caitlin Clark moves, the entire league feels it. And this might not be a vacation at all. This could be the first move in a much bigger chess match. To understand why Miami matters, you have to look at the timing. And that's where things get interesting. 2 weeks early. That's what makes this strange. Team USA camp had a clear schedule. Players knew exactly when they were expected to report. There was no emergency meeting. No publicized early workouts. There is no official reason for Clark to be in Miami ahead of schedule. And yet, there she was. If this were any other player, maybe it wouldn't spark headlines. But this is Caitlin Clark. Every move she makes creates conversation. Every appearance shifts the narrative. So when she arrives early, people start asking questions. Was she just getting extra representatives in? Possibly. Was she bonding with teammates before the intensity ramps up? Maybe. But here's the part that doesn't sit right with many observers. It wasn't just her. Aaliyah Boston was there. Other Fever connections surfaced. And when Sophie Cunningham's name began circulating in connection with Miami, eyebrows really went up. Because now, this doesn't look like simple pre-season preparation. Now, it looks coordinated. And coordination before an expansion draft matters. Coordination before free agency chaos matters even more. Let's talk about what the Fever are facing. The expansion draft is looming like a storm cloud. Teams will be forced to protect only a limited number of players. Someone valuable will be exposed. That's the harsh reality. And when players know difficult decisions are coming, they talk. They align. They strategize. It wouldn't be shocking if the core group wanted clarity before management makes those calls. But there's another layer here. Leadership. Last season, Clark entered the WNBA as the most hyped rookie in league history. Cameras everywhere. Pressure everywhere. Critics are waiting. Veterans watching. She handled it, but it wasn't smooth. There were growing pains. Media narratives. Physical play. Internal adjustments. Now, she's not just the rookie. She's the centerpiece. Arriving early sends a subtle but powerful message. It says, I'm not waiting for the season to start. It says, I'm building this now. It says, I'm taking control of what happens next. And when franchise players take control, locker room dynamics shift. Some embrace it. Some feel threatened. But no one ignores it. There's also the conditioning angle. Clark has been vocal about wanting to elevate her physical readiness. The WNBA schedule is brutal. Injuries last season exposed depth issues for Indiana. The team leaned heavily on chemistry to survive. That chemistry, often joked about as the power of friendship, was real. They played for each other. They fought through injuries together. It kept them competitive. But chemistry alone doesn't win championships. And maybe Clark knows that. Maybe Miami wasn't about bonding. Maybe it was about recalibrating. Because let's be honest, running it back with the exact same roster might not be enough. The league is evolving fast. Free agents are circling. Superteam whispers are growing louder. Other franchises are preparing aggressive moves. If Indiana waits, they risk falling behind. So what if Miami wasn't optional? What if it was urgent? There's one more thing worth noting. When star players arrive early, they often bring influence with them. Informal conversations turn into alignment. Alignment turns into expectations. And expectations change everything. Expectations turn into pressure on front offices. Was this simply about getting extra workouts in? Or was it about sending a message to management? We're serious. We're united. Protect the core. Make the right moves. Because when you zoom out, this offseason is bigger than Miami. It's about identity. Is Indiana truly building around Caitlin Clark as a long-term franchise pillar? Or are they still experimenting? Arriving early forces that question. And if Sophie Cunningham really was part of that Miami gathering, it adds fuel to another powerful theory. Sophie isn't just a role player. She brings edge, toughness, and emotional fire. She protects her teammates. She thrives in physical games. That kind of presence next to Clark isn't accidental, it's protective. And protection matters when your star is the most targeted player in the league. So maybe Miami wasn't about sunshine. Maybe it was about security. Maybe it was about drawing lines before the season even begins. And here's the uncomfortable part. When players gather privately before official camp, it can mean they don't fully trust how things will unfold publicly. They want unity before uncertainty hits. They want clarity before chaos begins. They want to lock in the inner circle before the outside noise gets loud again. Because once Team USA camp starts, media narratives explode. Every practice becomes a headline. Every scrimmage becomes debate fuel. Every interaction gets analyzed. Miami was quiet, controlled, intentional. And the timing suggests one thing above all: this wasn't random. But the real pressure isn't just about early workouts or chemistry sessions. It's about who might not be there when the dust settles. And once you look at the expansion draft math, this story stops feeling casual and starts feeling strategic. Here's the part fans don't like thinking about. Someone is getting left behind. That's the brutal math of an expansion draft. When a new franchise enters the league, existing teams can't protect everyone. They choose a limited number of players. The rest become vulnerable, exposed, available. And for Indiana, that decision won't be easy. Because this isn't just about talent. It's about loyalty. It's about chemistry. It's about protecting the right future. And that's exactly why Miami matters. When core players gather before major roster decisions are finalized, it suggests alignment. They are not just bonding. They are preparing. Let's break down the reality. Caitlin Clark, untouchable. Aliyah Boston, untouchable. Those two are the foundation. But once you move beyond the obvious names, things get complicated fast. Sophie Cunningham, Lexi Hull, bench depth. Role players who may not dominate stat sheets, but are critical emotionally and strategically. The front office has to ask uncomfortable questions. Who is essential long-term? Who is replaceable? Who fits the Clark timeline? And that last question might be the most important. Because make no mistake, the fever are now on Caitlin Clark's clock. The league revolves around her spotlight. Ticket sales spike when she plays. National broadcasts increase. Franchise value rises. That gravitational pull changes everything. Front offices don't just build teams anymore. They build ecosystems around stars. So when Clark shows up early in Miami, surrounded by key teammates, the subtext is powerful. This is my core. Are you keeping it? That's why Sophie Cunningham becomes extremely interesting in this context. Statistically, she isn't the centerpiece. But emotionally, she's an enforcer, a tone setter, a player who doesn't back down when games turn physical. Last season, Clark took hits, hard hits. Defensive pressure that crossed lines. Veteran physicality designed to test her endurance. Who stood firm in those moments? Who made opponents think twice? That matters in roster construction. And in an expansion draft, teams don't just evaluate points per game. They evaluate value, intangibles, edge, protection, and locker room temperature. There's also the contract layer, rookie deals, minimum contracts, free agency timing, and salary cap flexibility. Some players are easier to expose because the math works. Others are harder to lose because replacing their role costs far more than their salary suggests. If Sophie isn't protected, another franchise could scoop her up instantly. If Lexi is left available, does another team gamble on her upside? If depth pieces go, does the chemistry fracture? And here's the uncomfortable reality. Sometimes front offices gamble that emotional chemistry can be rebuilt. Sometimes they assume talent is replaceable. But what if that's wrong? Last season, Indiana survived injuries not because they had the most stacked roster, but because they had unity. They played for each other. They fought for each other. They believed. That doesn't show up in analytics. That doesn't translate into cap spreadsheets. But it wins games you shouldn't win. So when the Fever core quietly gathers in Miami before expansion decisions are finalized, it feels less like coincidence and more like consolidation. It feels like a silent meeting of the protected circle. And let's push this one step further. What if Clark's influence is already stronger than people realize? Superstars don't always publicly demand roster moves, but their presence shapes direction. If Clark builds strong relationships internally, management notices. If she thrives with certain players, that matters. If she feels protected with certain teammates on the floor, that matters even more. Front offices invest where their franchise player is most comfortable. And Miami could have been about locking that comfort in place. Now imagine you're the Fever front office. You know a super team could form elsewhere this offseason. You know free agents are watching. You know Clark's championship window is opening fast. Do you risk losing key emotional glue pieces in an expansion draft? Or do you sacrifice depth elsewhere to protect the inner circle? That's the tension. And that tension makes Miami feel strategic. Because expansion drafts aren't just transactional. They're emotional fractures waiting to happen. Players talk. They speculate. They wonder if their name is on the unprotected list. And that uncertainty changes everything. That uncertainty can quietly poison a locker room, unless leadership intervenes early, unless alignment happens before panic sets in. Clark arriving 2 weeks early suggests urgency. It suggests she doesn't want the off-season drifting aimlessly. It suggests she understands exactly what's at stake. There's another layer here that very few are discussing. What if the Miami gathering was also about clarity? What if players wanted to know where they stood before rumors began spiraling publicly? Expansion drafts create insecurity. Free agency creates anxiety. Super team rumors create fear. And fear spreads fast. The smartest teams get ahead of it. They communicate. They unify. They decide internally before the league forces decisions externally. If that's what Miami was, then this wasn't just preparation. It was protection. But here's where things get even more complicated. Protecting Sophie might mean exposing someone else valuable. Keeping chemistry might cost flexibility. Saving loyalty might sacrifice upgrade potential. And that leads to the next uncomfortable conversation. Because even if Indiana keeps its core intact, even if no major pieces are lost, even if Clark, Boston, Sophie, and the key contributors stay together, is it enough? That question is getting louder. And it's about to collide with something much bigger. Because while Indiana is trying to protect what they've built, the rest of the league might be building something far more dangerous. And that's where the super team whispers begin. Here's what makes this off-season different. It's not just about the Fever. It's about everyone. The WNBA is quietly heading toward one of the most volatile free agency periods in recent memory. Contracts are expiring. Rookie deals are maturing. Veterans are weighing legacy versus leverage. And front offices across the league are preparing for something dramatic. Not a small upgrade. Not a minor trade. A full-scale power consolidation. And if that happens, it changes everything. Because once one franchise loads up, everyone else has to react, immediately. Now suddenly, Miami doesn't look like a vacation. It looks like positioning. Let's talk about the whispers. Dallas. That's the city that keeps surfacing. Not confirmed. Not official. Just a growing murmur across fan circles and insider chatter. The idea of a UConn reunion. The possibility of elite players aligning under one roof. The kind of move that could shift the balance of the entire league overnight. Is it guaranteed? No. Is it possible? Absolutely. And here's why that matters for Indiana. Caitlin Clark isn't just competing for playoff spots. She's competing for relevance in a rapidly escalating arms race. If a super team forms elsewhere, the Fever cannot afford to stand still. Running it back becomes dangerous. Loyalty becomes expensive. And chemistry alone won't survive a loaded roster across the conference. So ask yourself this. If you're Clark, watching the league landscape shift in real time, do you wait, or do you act early? Miami suggests she's not waiting. Because super teams don't just happen in July. They begin in February. In quiet meetups. In private conversations. In subtle alignments. Players don't publicly announce recruitment. But stars talk. They float ideas. They test interest. They gauge loyalty. And sometimes, they gather before the headlines start. Now here's where this gets even more interesting. What if Miami wasn't just about protecting the current roster? What if it was about strengthening it? Because while fans are focused on who might leave in the expansion draft, very few are asking who might be joining. Free agents notice momentum. They notice unity. They notice early commitment. If Clark and the Fever core are visibly locked in before off-season chaos begins, that sends a powerful signal. We're stable. We're serious. We're building. And free agents gravitate toward clarity. Let's not ignore the Clark factor here. She's not just another player entering her second season. She's a brand. She's getting national attention. She's broadcast leverage. Players understand that playing next to her instantly elevates exposure. More national games, more sponsorship eyes, more spotlight. That's powerful currency. So when Clark shows up early, visibly aligned with teammates, it could also be a message to the league. If you want in, this is the foundation. But the super team fear runs deeper than just Dallas rumors. It's structural. The WNBA is evolving financially. Media deals are expanding. Visibility is increasing. And when money rises, consolidation follows. Stars don't always spread out evenly. They cluster. They chase rings. They protect legacies. And an imbalance forms fast. If Indiana doesn't prepare for that shift, they risk becoming competitive, but not dominant. Dangerous, but not feared. Exciting, but not inevitable. Clark's arrival changed expectations. Now the bar isn't just making the playoffs. It's content. It's control. It's sustainability. So Miami begins to feel like a defensive maneuver. A preemptive strike against instability. Because imagine this scenario. A super team forms elsewhere. Indiana loses a valuable piece in the expansion draft. Free agents hesitate. Suddenly, the Fever are chasing instead of dictating. That's the nightmare. And stars don't like chasing. They like steering. There's another subtle angle here. Leadership vacuum. When leagues shift, young stars either grow into anchors or get swallowed by louder veterans elsewhere. Clark arriving early suggests growth. Ownership. Awareness. She understands that waiting for management to solve everything might not be enough. Great players don't just play. They influence. They attract. They stabilize. Miami could have been a moment of stabilization. Because when uncertainty hits, silence is dangerous. Unity isn't. Now let's talk about Sophie Cunningham in this context. If the league is preparing for physical, high-stakes, star-loaded matchups, you need players who thrive in chaos. Sophie brings edge. She brings confrontation when necessary. She brings toughness when games turn brutal. In a league trending toward consolidation and aggression, that archetype becomes more valuable. So if Clark senses a super team threat forming, she may also recognize the need to fortify internally. And fortifying doesn't always mean adding a superstar. Sometimes, it means doubling down on protectors. But here's where the tension peaks. What if the Fever's internal bond, the chemistry everyone praises, becomes a trap? When you love your core, it's harder to make ruthless upgrades. When friendships are strong, hard cuts hurt more. When loyalty runs deep, cold business decisions feel colder. Super teams don't operate emotionally. They operate strategically. And if Indiana wants to compete in that environment, sentimentality can't override reality. That's the crossroads Miami hints at. Are they gathering to protect what they built, or prepare for what they must become? Because if a super team wave hits the league, only two types of franchises survive it: the ones who build one, or the ones who are ready for one. And Caitlin Clark showing up early, ahead of schedule, ahead of narrative, ahead of pressure, feels like someone who understands the storm is coming. But even if Indiana avoids losing key pieces, even if they strengthen internally, there's still a hard truth looming. Unity and preparation don't automatically equal championships. And that brings us to the uncomfortable debate no one wants to say out loud. Is this roster actually good enough? That's where things get complicated. And that's where Section 4 changes the tone entirely. Because here's the truth no one likes admitting. The Fever were lovable last season. They were gritty. They were unified. They were resilient through injuries, chaos, media storms, and pressure that would have cracked most young rosters. But lovable doesn't automatically mean championship ready. And that's the tension building beneath the surface. Yes, the power of friendship narrative became a meme, but it was real. That team genuinely fought for each other. When injuries piled up, when rotations shifted, when Clark was targeted nightly, they didn't splinter. They tightened. That matters. But championships demand more than unity. They demand upgrades. And this is where Miami starts to feel less like bonding, and more like evaluation. Because when you look at the Fever objectively, there are clear questions. The power forward position remains unsettled. Bench production has been inconsistent. Scoring depth fluctuates. There were games last season where Clark carried the offensive load at an unsustainable level. And as the league adjusts to her tendencies, that burden will only increase. Opponents now have film. They have schemes. They know how to pressure her full court. They know how to attack passing lanes. They know how to test her physically. So running it back without meaningful upgrades could be dangerous. Chemistry can carry you through adversity. But raw talent wins playoff series. And here's the part that complicates everything. If you upgrade, someone beloved might have to go. That's the cold edge of professional sports. Maybe it's a rotation player. Maybe it's a locker room favorite. Maybe it's someone who played a crucial emotional role last season. But improvement isn't sentimental. It's strategic. And if a super team forms elsewhere, Indiana cannot afford emotional paralysis. Now ask yourself this. Would Clark be satisfied with incremental improvement? Or does she want dominance? She's wired competitively. That's obvious. The way she responds to defensive pressure. The way she demands the ball late. The way she doesn't shy away from big moments. Players like that don't just want to compete. They want control. They want to dictate the league's direction. And if that's the internal standard, then good enough won't last long. That's where front office pressure intensifies. Protecting Sophie in an expansion draft makes emotional sense. But if there's a chance to acquire a higher ceiling forward, that decision becomes harder. Keeping depth players preserves continuity. But if a star becomes available in free agency, continuity can become an obstacle. Miami could have been about confronting this reality early. Because if the core players are aligned on ambition, if they all understand that comfort must be sacrificed for growth, then tough moves become easier. But if there's division, if some players feel secure while others sense vulnerability, that tension fractures silently. And silent fractures don't show up until playoff pressure exposes them. There's also the Clark MVP factor, quietly reshaping expectations. She's already being discussed as a favorite. Think about that. Second season, already in MVP conversations. That kind of projection changes team psychology. Because if your franchise player is ascending that quickly, the roster must rise with her. Otherwise, the narrative shifts from Clark elevates the fever to Clark carries the fever. And carrying rarely leads to championships. Look around the league historically. True contenders have balance, elite guard play, front court strength, reliable bench scoring, and defensive anchors. Indiana showed flashes, but flashes aren't sustained dominance. Now layer in fatigue. The WNBA schedule is relentless. Travel demands are real. Injuries aren't hypothetical, they are inevitable. If Indiana doesn't improve depth meaningfully, they risk overloading Clark again. And that's dangerous long-term. So Miami begins to look like a checkpoint. A moment where players could privately acknowledge, last year was growth. This year must be aggression. And aggression requires sacrifice. Let's talk specifically about the power forward situation. Natasha Howard has been solid, experienced, reliable. But is she the long-term answer next to Clark and Boston? Or is there room for a more dynamic stretch presence? A forward who can space the floor wider, who can switch defensively across multiple positions. Those marginal upgrades decide playoff series. And if Indiana doesn't pursue that tier of player, they risk plateauing. Plateaus are dangerous for rising stars. Because when a franchise feels stuck, superstars begin evaluating trajectory. Quietly, internally. And trajectory matters more than friendship. This is why expansion draft and free agency conversations can't be separated from Miami. If Clark and the core gathered early, maybe it wasn't just about solidarity. Maybe it was about ambition. About making sure everyone is aligned before management makes irreversible decisions. Because the worst scenario for Indiana isn't losing a role player. It's losing momentum. Momentum is fragile. Right now, the Fever are one of the most talked about teams in basketball. But attention fades fast if wins don't follow hype. And hype without growth becomes pressure. That's the balancing act. Maintain chemistry. Add firepower. Avoid fracture. Elevate ceiling. The league isn't waiting. Super team rumors are accelerating. Free agents are calculating. And the MVP spotlight around Clark is intensifying. The margin for hesitation is shrinking. Miami might have been the first sign that Indiana understands that. But just when you think this is purely about roster math and upgrades, another layer complicates everything. Because as Clark's power rises, so does the league politics around her. And that's where things get explosive. Here's the uncomfortable truth for the rest of the league. Caitlin Clark isn't just popular anymore. She's powerful. There's a difference. Popularity sells tickets. Power reshapes dynamics. And Clark is entering her second season with MVP narratives already forming around her name. That kind of acceleration doesn't happen without friction. When one star rises this fast, others feel it. Veterans notice it. Media narratives amplify it. Award discussions intensify. And suddenly, every performance carries political weight. The MVP debate alone is layered. There are established stars who've been grinding for years. Veterans who've carried franchises without Clark's spotlight. So if Clark surges into that race early, some will celebrate it. Others will question it. And that tension spills everywhere. Locker rooms, front offices, off-season dynamics. This is where Miami becomes more than strategy. It becomes insulation. Because as outside pressure grows, internal unity becomes essential. If Clark is stepping into MVP territory, the Fever must solidify around her, not just talent-wise, but emotionally. Public scrutiny will intensify. Every loss will be dissected. Every stat line compared. Every highlight debated. If the team fractures under that pressure, it becomes a distraction. But if they are aligned, it becomes fuel. Now consider this. When a player's brand grows, so does her leverage. Not arrogantly, but structurally. Networks want her games. Sponsors want her image. Fans travel to see her. Front offices understand that. And that reality reshapes decisions. Clark may never walk into meetings demanding changes. But her presence alone shifts direction. If she thrives with certain players, they become assets. If she builds chemistry early, that chemistry becomes harder to dismantle. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes, it moves quietly. And that's exactly what this off-season feels like. A quiet recalibration of influence. There's also the narrative battle floating in the background. Comparisons, performance debates, and award politics. These may seem disconnected from Miami, but they are not. Perception shapes alignment. If Clark's narrative continues to grow, if she's framed as the future MVP, franchise centerpiece, rising icon, teammates respond differently. Some thrive beside that spotlight. Others struggle in its shadow. Which makes Miami even more strategic. If the core is unified early, jealousy can't fester. Narrative fractures can't creep in. Identity becomes fixed before outside voices attempt to reshape it. Here's the shift. Last season, Clark entered the league as a rising star. This season, she enters as a gravitational force. That changes everything. How referees officiate. How opponents guard. How executives think. How teammates position themselves. If she's truly entering MVP territory, Indiana can't operate like a rebuilding team anymore. They must act like contenders. And contenders don't move casually. They move intentionally. Miami was intentional. Now brings Sophie Cunningham back into focus. In high-pressure MVP races, physicality rises. Emotions rise. Scrutiny intensifies. You need players who embrace chaos. Sophie brings edge. She brings confrontation. She brings emotional reinforcement. And when your franchise star enters MVP-level spotlight, that kind of presence becomes invaluable. But power shifts are rarely smooth. As Clark's influence grows, expectations skyrocket. If the Fever underperform, criticism won't target depth pieces. It will target her. If the roster isn't upgraded, pressure intensifies. If a super team forms elsewhere, the narrative becomes brutal. Why didn't Indiana prepare? That's why Miami feels preemptive. Great franchises anticipate. They don't scramble. Clark arriving early, before camp, before headlines, before pressure, feels like anticipation. Now zoom out one final time. Expansion draft pressure. Free agency volatility. Super team rumors. MVP politics. Brand acceleration. Chemistry versus upgrades. All of these threads converge in one moment. A quiet Miami gathering. What looked like casual off-season footage may actually represent the first move in a massive recalibration. Because the Fever is no longer just developing. They are being evaluated as a future power. And Caitlin Clark is no longer just adjusting. She's ascending. The league feels it. Opponents feel it. Executives feel it. And maybe Miami was about making sure her own locker room feels it too. So let's call it what it is. Caitlin Clark showing up in Miami 2 weeks early wasn't random. It wasn't accidental. And it wasn't meaningless. It was a signal. A signal that the Fever understand the stakes. A signal that alignment matters before chaos hits. A signal that the franchise centerpiece isn't waiting for direction. Expansion draft decisions are coming. Free agency turbulence is coming. Super team rumors are accelerating. MVP conversations are intensifying. And in the center of it all stands Caitlin Clark, not just as a scorer, not just as a highlight machine, but as a force reshaping the league's balance. Miami may have been quiet, but quiet moves often precede loud seasons. And if this gathering truly was strategic, about protecting chemistry, preparing upgrades, and insulating against outside pressure, then we're not watching off-season bonding. We're watching the early stages of something calculated, something intentional, something that could define the next era of the WNBA. The real question isn't why she was in Miami. The real question is what happens next. Because if this was the first move, the second move could change everything. Center.